Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. This is your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, all about, of course, your Arizona Cardinals. My co-host, as always, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and this is episode 290. We're almost to 300 shows, Seth. For those of you who've been listening since 2013, congratulations. Hopefully we're a little bit better than we were back then. We've had some doozies of some statements. I know I still remember the show back in 2013 when I declared, I think we're seeing Michael Floyd take over as the Cardinals' number one receiver. And, you know, he's flamed out of the league and Larry Fitzgerald's still playing. But, yeah. Episode 290, Seth and I are here to talk about what's all going on with the Arizona Cardinals, and unfortunately, it is not the best because the Cardinals have lost 3 in a row and 4 of 5. They are now 6-6 following a 38-28 loss to the LA Rams. They actually bumped out of the number 7 slot in the wild card in the NFC playoff race, and currently are on the outside looking in. As we kind of get started, Seth, what's wrong? So we're going to talk about what's wrong with the offense. We're talking about Kyler Murray. It kind of feels like people believe that the league has figured him out. Are they actually in danger of missing the postseason? We'll talk a little bit about some of the banter that's going around about Kyler Murray's demeanor. And then we'll look ahead to the Week 14 game against the Giants. So let's kick this off, Seth. What do you think is going on with this Cardinals offense?
That's a fair question. I mean, it seems that they're definitely missing Larry Fitzgerald's presence opposite DeAndre Hopkins. Even though Fitz doesn't have a ton of yards this year, he's still second on the team in receptions, which is baffling. And his catch rate is second highest on the team for somebody with over 20 targets, second only to Chase Edmonds. And so, I think when you take away a reliable second option, even if it's not hugely productive, it makes it a little easier to game plan. They were trying to get the ball out quick, obviously, with Aaron Donald and that Rams defense on the other side of the ball. And then they just, the offensive line has kind of played worse and worse the last couple of weeks. And so I think all of that is kind of combining to make a less potent and productive offense. And when we're, that efficiency that we talked about earlier in the year when they were, number one in first downs and number one in plays and number one in yards, like that all is gone now, and I think we're kind of seeing what happens.
Yeah, it's really interesting because they went from that midpoint of the season when you go from the Jets, Cowboys, Seahawks, Dolphins, and Bills. You've got a 5-game stretch in which they go over 440 yards of offense in each one of those games, and over 30 and at least 30 points in each one of those games, and the offense is rolling humming. And then you go to 21 and 314. So they haven't gone over 314 yards in the last 3 games, and they got the points back up with the Rams game, but that kind of felt like fool's gold because when they give up 38 points. But the offensive production is way down. Kyler's running is down. The passing is down. Pretty much everything across the board is a problem. And I think it kind of starts with, you're probably right. It's really interesting just to see how Now, Fitz was there. Fitz was playing in that Thursday night game. But with New England and the Rams, the passing game just seemed a little out of sorts. And it's very interesting just to see how his presence and what it should have happened, it should have opened things up for a guy like Andy Isabella who would play his position and has a different dynamic. But Kyler's play's been a little bit uneven. I guess to say the way he had played so well early on. He was getting MVP talk, like that. We weren't being over dramatic or hyperbolic in the fact that he was deserving MVP discussion. And now he's really looking kind of ordinary. And even I don't like to go to the route where it's like saying he's basically Josh Rosen with some mobility, because that offense was really like what the Cardinals are doing right now offensively is still much better than what they did in 2018.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it ended up. It comes down to that efficiency that we talked about. When they're behind schedule and they're pressed, they're not able to run the balls effectively, and that doesn't open up the passing game. And, people look at what Josh Allen did against the 49ers, or they look at Patrick Mahomes, but the reality becomes, there's only so many players in the league that play effectively from behind, and are able to create effective and efficient offense from behind. And Josh Allen is not one of those guys. He's a front runner. Mahomes is, whether you like it or not, Mahomes is just on a different level than everybody, and that includes Kyler Murray. So you're not going to be able to compare those guys. And so when you look at it, you look at a guy like you look at a guy like Russell Wilson, and you say, what was Russell Wilson doing in these situations in year 2 or 3 compared, obviously to Kyler and where Kyler's at now? And that's kind of how you look at it. And you look at a guy like Josh Allen in the same way. You and I were talking about it off the air. Kyler Murray literally has better numbers across the board than Josh Allen in year 2, outside of winning. And that's the thing, is when you're taking a step every year in the right direction, I think we have to remember that as much as we do, the ineffectiveness and kind of getting locked into, is this team bad? Is this team, do they need to make changes type of questions, as opposed to, this is just part of the growing. They're just not quite there yet where they're consistently producing. And by consistently, I mean, let's be honest, the Chiefs barely beat a bad Denver Broncos team on Sunday Night Football. Patrick Mahomes didn't play spectacular by any means. He had a decent game, and they put up 22 points in a close win. Mahomes had 318 yards, but he was 25 of 40. That's got to be one of his lower, completion percentage games in a while. And so when you just kind of look at it overall, I think the reality becomes that this is still just year 2. There's clearly a lack of talent still on the offensive side of the ball. And I mean, going back to Kansas City, not to harp on it, but I mean, obviously that's the goal or the mold everybody is shooting for, to have an offense like that. When you look at the Chiefs, something that they've done every single year is add offensive weapons, whether it be, Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Le'Veon Bell. I mean, they're literally adding weapons for Patrick Mahomes every single year. The Cardinals went and got Kenyon Drake last year. The rookie receivers they drafted have not panned out. This is just reality. They just haven't. Drake's having a nice year. But, and then they obviously went out and got the alpha in DeAndre Hopkins. But, and the thing I always say is if you were to just take the Cardinals' offensive skill players, how many of those guys would start for Kansas City? And I think the only person is Hopkins. And so I'm not saying that they have to get that type of weaponry where you're talking about an all-pro tight end and Travis Kelce and an all-pro, you have an all-pro wide receiver in Tyreek Hill, but you're getting, another guy like a Sammy Watkins or a Mecole Hardman, but you do need a little more than just DeAndre Hopkins. And when you look at the Chiefs, they have, having Hill and Kelce is really a duo that is basically unmatched in the NFL. I mean, they're both top 5 in receiving yards in the NFL. That's how dynamic they are. And, Travis Kelce is about to set an NFL record for receiving by a tight end in a season. So that's just, when you look at the offense, you have to put it all into context. I really didn't think that they would miss Fitz as much as they have, but like you said, there's something that he brings that a guy like Andy Isabella, who is, without question a better, just pure athlete at this point in the two's career, he just doesn't bring the same type of game readiness. And Christian Kirk has been the guy that's really kind of floundered the most the last 2 games, when you would kind of expect him to step up into that role. If anything, it's almost like he needs Fitz more than Hopkins does, because now all of a sudden they can just concentrate on Christian Kirk as a second receiver. I mean, he had 1 catch for 2 yards against the Rams.
And
one catch for 2 yards.
That's crazy. But I will say this, and Cliff Kingsbury is right now. Cliff Kingsbury right now getting a lot of heat from fans because it seems it's starting to sound Steve Wilkes-like in the way he repeats himself. He keeps saying that the other team has a good plan. Now, we will have to say this. The 3 teams that they've faced the last 3 weeks are immeasurably better than the teams they faced before. Seattle, now while defensively they're still kind of on pace to give up more passing yards than they ever have, they spent the first half of the season severely undermanned up front. And so that is a talented group. And Bill Belichick, even though the defensive metrics don't look good for the Patriots, you knew that Belichick was going to be up for that game. The Rams' defense is one of the best in the league. And the thing in particular, at least the last 2 games, the Patriots have great cover guys, and the Rams do too. They're getting great production, not only from Jalen Ramsey, but their second and third cornerbacks as well. They're playing very well. And so, but just the interesting thing is I can't tell at this point, and we talked to you this about off the air, it's really hard to determine kind of the source of the problem. Is it player execution? Is it the play calling so things aren't designed? Or simply is it Kyler's decision-making or his throwing preferences? Because we've seen Christian Kirk, and that's kind of the weird thing, is that you'd think a guy that really fits the mold of the type of receiver that Cliff Kingsbury likes to have, he's just not getting, not getting many opportunities. Is it because he's not getting open? Is it because the plays designed to go elsewhere and Kyler's going in that direction? That's the part that's super puzzling to me, is because there doesn't seem to be other than the one thing that everyone's wondering about that Kyler denies is the reason, and that's, hey, once you take his legs out of the offense and you make it so unless he forces it, that he has to hand the ball off on those read options, that you make this offense look ordinary. Unless it's that, and they swear that's not the case, then it's really hard to kind of pinpoint what the problem is.
Yeah, and that's where I think waiting, and I know it's frustrating to hear this, I think waiting to see how the season wraps up. I mean, you can have lulls and down periods in a season, especially when you're in the second year of your career. And we hold Kyler to a very high standard, and our expectation level for him is very high. But, he's still on pace for just under 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, just under, I think, 800 yards rushing now. He's, just on pace for under 5,000 total yards and just over 40 total touchdowns. Like, he's still...
It's still ridiculous production, but it's kind of like he raised our eye... He changed our eye level for what we wanted for him, and now people are almost saying, well, he's never going to be good. I'm like, okay, let's dial that down a little bit. But maybe there is just something. So he thinks that he doesn't have to run for the Cardinals to be successful. Now, I believe that is true, but at least over the previous games leading up to these past three games, is that what made the offense special was the fact that you didn't, he was such a factor in the running game. And now you take that away, or at least I'm sure that's the thing. Last year, it felt like he was purposely trying not to run. And in these last three games, it's almost going back to that. And I think it's based on the reads. Like when you have the read option, he says, there's a specific look. When it gets that look, I'm supposed to hand the ball off. I do not doubt that at all. But it felt like, it really unlocked another level of the offense. I'm not saying that he has to run for the Cardinals to be successful. I just think at this point in his career, the offense is better if he's able to run, because the passing game just isn't as consistent, especially if the running game from the running backs is average. And that's what they've been getting from the running game without Kyler Murray in the last 3 weeks, is an average game. And there's something I really picked out from what Cliff Kingsbury said, not only when he spoke to reporters on Monday, but also what he said on the radio, on his radio interview immediately after speaking to the media. And it's the first time really this season he's talked about player execution, and he's saying that execution of the basic concepts of their base installs have not been executed as well. So I'm assuming these are the basic run plays, and probably some of their simple pass routes. And the lack of execution or focus on these is leading to other problems.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, is when you can't do the little things right, then you tend to not be able to do anything right, or the more complex things right. And quite frankly, when you can't do the little things or the easier things or the basic things right, then you can't usually run the more complex plays that are set up by those plays. And so that, that's what it boils down to for this team, is that they have to get to a point where they find consistency. And, I think the biggest thing is, and we go back to the weapons conversation a little bit and all of that, is at the end of the day, when you look at Kyler and what he brings to the team right now, his ability to run and be a multifaceted offensive weapon is more valuable than his just ability to throw. And a lot of that is because he he doesn't have the weapons to work with right now, or as good of weapons as he needs right now. And so he ends up being the second best, offensive weapon on the team with the ball in his hands when you're, and it's hard to explain it like this, but he's basically, if he's not throwing to DeAndre Hopkins, him running is probably the second best thing that he does, because he's the second most dynamic player with the ball in his hands. And so it makes that really, like, that's the thing with Patrick Mahomes or, these other guys that we talked about. They have these dynamic players around them that when the ball gets in their hands consistently, that they're able to do things, whether, it's Russell Wilson, with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, who, by the way, lost to the New York Giants this week. So again, like, let's not, jump off a bridge and say, well, this team is, they were a flash in the pan. Everybody's figured them out. There's a lot of things that happen in the NFL that don't make sense. And I think as we get closer, the biggest thing to the end of the year is do they get back to being consistent? I think that was, kind of your perfect way to put that, is that they just lack consistency at this juncture to be considered a good team.
Now let's talk a little bit more about specifically the running and whether the Cardinals have been figured out. So coming up next on the Rights of C-Red podcast, the best hour of ours talking Cardinals talk on the web. Let's delve into whether or not the Cardinals can be successful without a running Kyler Murray, and if the league in fact has figured them out. That's coming up next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. So we pose the question: has the league figured out the Cardinals offense? I'm going to put this kind of simply, kind of. And as we know, in the NFL, there's like, offenses are so good and defenses are so good, coaching is so good, schemes are so good, that you can always take something away. And early in the season, for whatever reason, probably teams weren't prepared for exactly how dangerous Kyler was going to be running the ball. So have they figured it out? Maybe a little bit. That doesn't mean that they need him to run. All that means is that the Cardinals need the next adjustment. Either they need to do something else to open something else up. So obviously, if you take away his running ability and say they're doing that by keeping a couple extra guys in to spy, you need to exploit that with the passing game. Or you need to move him to different places so he has open running lanes or open passing lanes. And then there's the other factor. If in fact that has been taken from him temporarily, he needs to take the next step in his passing. There is one thing in his passing, in his throwing the ball, that still needs a little bit of work, and that is, like with pretty much every second-year quarterback, is throwing with anticipation. He doesn't consistently throw guys open. He's got an arm that you won't believe, and he makes some amazing throws, but he still, like Josh Rosen did his rookie year, there's times when he throws a little bit late. And the perfect example of that was against the Seahawks at that final drive, where if he makes that throw to Andy Isabella just coming out of his break, he goes into for that game-tying touchdown. Whether it was he didn't see it quickly enough because he was looking another way, he didn't, honestly, maybe he didn't trust Andy to make that play, or he's just not trusting his eyes yet. That's the next thing that's got to happen. So has the league figured Kyler out? Well, the answer might be a little bit yes.
Yeah, and as you said, it's the reality that they get him and then he gets them, and that's kind of the ebbs and flows of the NFL. I mean, again, outside of the Hall of Fame kind of all-pro quarterbacks, nobody averages Patrick Mahomes numbers. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Like, there's one Patrick Mahomes. There's, and I get that we're in a era where the quarterback play is absurd, but you still have growth that needs to happen. And you look at Mahomes and I would wager to say that a lot of people would have looked at his 2019 after his record-setting 2018 and said, oh, well, he had a bad season. I mean, he went from 50, not bad season, but he regressed. The league's starting to figure him out, right? 50 touchdowns to 26 touchdowns. And I get that he only played in 14 games, but I mean, he only played 2 less games and threw 24 less touchdowns. That's just the NFL. And the reality is he's probably it's very unlikely that he ever throws for 50 touchdowns in a season again. I mean, you look at him this year, he only, quote fingers, he only has 31 this year with 4 games remaining. And so the reality is that everybody goes through these kind of ebbs and flows and things of that nature. I think the biggest thing for Kyler to improve on and to continue to improve on is, obviously he needs to continue to grow as a passer, but I think he needs to start to trust his receivers a little more, and I think he needs to continue to develop that kind of relationship with receivers where he has that trust to kind of let the ball fly at times. Like you said, like there's anticipation that seems to be missing from where he's at right now and what the Cardinals need of him. And so, I think that's one of the bigger things that he's missing, but I don't think that he's in a bad spot by any means.
Agreed. And to your point that you made before about how, him taking off and being actually was like their second best option, there might be something to that in terms of a competitive guy who really wants to win. And so if he can't throw the ball to Hopkins and he doesn't completely trust what he sees, then taking off and running, even though, we know this, Kyler is an able runner. He's not necessarily a one who wants to run. He just knows that when he does, he can make things happen. He doesn't believe he has to run, but if that's what he needs to do, he does it. And that's kind of the interesting thing with that is that maybe his desire to win, we've seen the Kobe effect, if for lack of when he knows that he's the best option, like the Kobe Bryant who took a ton of shots, but honestly, if he's not taking the shots, look at the guys around him. Kyler's in that situation, so you can make a questionable throw that you might get rewarded on, and maybe he's just not there yet in the passing. And now, here's the other thing for me, and that's if they're going to take away Kyler on the read option, then they need to get better production from Drake and Edmonds, whether that's a better read on their cut and the hole they go into, whether that's better blocking. But I think that might be initially what Kingsbury's talking about, is that their base installs for runs need to be more productive. Because if they're able to run more effectively, they will open up those holes for Kyler. Because if Kenyon's getting 5-6 yards consistently, then they won't have any choice but to key on him, which will then open other things up.
Yeah, and you kind of look at where they are this year and where Kyler is this year. And at the end of the day, he's having a nice season. He's only at 2.2 or 2.3 on his interception percentage. I don't really go by too much go by number of interceptions unless it's kind of absurd. And he's up his touchdown percentage this year while maintaining the same type of interception percentage as last year. And you look at the numbers this year, and Russell Wilson's got a higher interception percentage than him. Tom Brady has a higher interception percentage than him. He's similar to guys like, Baker Mayfield, who's now getting talked about as an MVP again. Justin Herbert, who, is setting the NFL world on fire.
But not winning games.
Yeah.
But not winning games.
And so that's the thing. It's like, you look at it, and he's actually pretty close to Josh Allen. And I think the biggest thing, maybe the most important, and the thing that you kind of take away from all of this is that Kyler has to stop compounding mistakes. Meaning, when he makes a mistake, coming back and making another one by trying to get it all back in one play. I thought we saw that in the Rams game when he fumbled the ball and he came back and immediately threw a pick six because he's trying to force a ball that isn't there. And so instead of understanding the situation, and I don't want this to come out wrong, but maybe understanding that the game is lost at that point, or that one throw isn't going to make or break the game, to play it a little more carefully and make sure that, hey, we just need to get a first down. We don't need to get a touchdown. And I felt like the throw to Andy Isabella on that play was a little too, a little too risky. And I get where it's at because of that point in the game, but I think that's one of the things he's got to figure out how to fix, is those compounded mistakes where he makes one and then comes back and makes another one.
Which is an easy thing to do. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk more about the Cardinals, but this time, are they in danger of missing the postseason? They're bumped out right now. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals, with their loss combined with the victory by the Minnesota Vikings in overtime over the Jacksonville Jaguars, I will say the Cardinals almost got all the help they needed again. The Lions came back and beat the Bears. The 49ers lost. And then Jacksonville came back to tie the game at the end of regulation, so it looked like the Cardinals might get help on all fronts again. However, the Vikings did win in overtime. And as a result of, as we're getting to playoff tiebreakers, the Vikings have a better record against common opponents, going 2-1 against the teams that the Cardinals are 1-2 against. That would be the Lions, the Panthers, and the Cowboys. Puts them ahead in terms of playoff seeding, even though they're both 6-6. As we look at 4 games left, the Cardinals are at 6-6. Just a week ago, we said we felt that they were in control of that final wild card spot. Do you feel the same this week, or are they in danger of missing the postseason?
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to make the postseason at this point. I think they have to get to 9 wins to do so. I don't think 3-1 is impossible, but it's definitely, after this weekend in the NFL, it definitely feels less likely that they win 3 of their last 4. And so it's not that you felt that the Rams game at home was the best chance to beat the Rams, but I think we would both agree that we would expect them to win at home over the Rams than on the road against the Rams.
Very likely, yes.
So, I look at this and I think that the Cardinals are probably on the wrong side of the playoff chase now because they don't control their own destiny. Obviously, if they win out, go 4-0 and end up 10-6, I don't think Minnesota is going to end up 10-6. But I do think that they have to get to 9-7 to really go back to what you and I would call controlling their destiny.
I agree. We talked about this last week. All year, they had managed to stay, we've been using the phrase ahead of schedule. In terms of expectations, they'd stayed ahead of everything. This loss put them a little behind. When they were 6-5, they were still in control, but then a loss, 6-6, now puts them a little bit behind the 8 ball because most importantly is that with Minnesota, they will not have a tiebreak at all. So Minnesota owns that tiebreak because they still have another game with the Lions, but the worst that they're going to do is 2-2 against those common opponents. So the Cardinals have to win more games than Minnesota, and it just comes down to that. And so where the Cardinals are now at is probably this actually matches in line completely with what preseason expectations were for this team nationally. Some analysts had them from being bad to kind of good. Like they would battle for a playoff spot, and I think I predicted 9 wins and missing the playoffs. I think when I initially made that, they didn't have that last wild card spot there, and so they are no longer on schedule. They're a little bit behind schedule now, which is kind of a trend if you look at how they've done offensively. That's kind of been the case. They stay ahead of schedule or stay on schedule, they're really good. And now they're a little bit behind. And so while if you look at, I think, Football Outsiders, looking at the teams that are vying for that number 7 seed, they have the best playoff odds of that group. Still only it's like 46%. But it starts with, and we keep talking about like controlling their destiny, but that all begins with them winning. And the problem is where we feel right now. Yes, they're very much in danger of making the playoffs because guess what? They've lost 3 in a row and 4 out of 5, and honestly are just a miracle throw away from 5 games, a 5-game losing streak, which would really put a damper on that start that they had to start the year. And the middle of that middle play of the season. So, are they in danger? Absolutely. But it's still very capable to turn it around, especially with the schedule that they have coming up. Now, unfortunately, while they are playing an NFC East team the next 2 weeks in the Giants and the Eagles, neither one of those teams is a good team. However, we're playing every single one of these games with the season left on the line. Depending on how things go with San Francisco the next couple of weeks, you have 4 games against 4 teams very much in the playoff race. And both the Giants and the Eagles are battling for a division title. The 49ers, they took a stumble last night to falling in 5-7, so they're even more behind schedule. And then you have the Rams again, who are they've been the NFC West has been a mix-up of people at the top of the division because I believe in each of the last 3 weeks, maybe there's been a different leader at the start of the week. They have the Cardinals, Seahawks, and Rams have all been in first place. So they are most certainly in danger of missing the postseason. But I still think if they turn things around, and not necessarily to where they go 4-0, but just start playing the way they were earlier, I still think they have the best chance of the postseason over the teams that they're vying with. Because if you look at Minnesota, they've got games against the Saints and the Bucks. If the Cardinals win this week, they are going to pass somebody because either Tampa loses and the Cardinals will pass them, or Minnesota will lose and they'll pass them. So in that sense, they still have the best chance of making the playoffs with those teams that they're battling with, but they're certainly in danger of it because they're not playing well.
No, they're not, and that's kind of the big thing that has to be overcome at this point is that they're not playing at a high level. And so if they're not playing at a high level, then it's going to be hard to maintain pace with other teams who seem to be getting it all together. I mean, remember the Vikings were 1-5, now they're 6-6. The Cardinals were 6-2, and now are 6-6. So they basically have swapped positions of where they were, and that's a big comeback for the Vikings. But we're talking about the final quarter of the season, and so do the Cardinals have another 3-1 run in them? Do they have a 4-0 run? I think they have that ability. The question is, can they find the consistency to again, get to that type of play?
Coming next on the Rise Up Series podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the world. Let's move on and talk about something that is making a little bit of noise here around locally, and that would be the demeanor and body language. A couple of things I don't love to talk about, but it's worth talking about this time. Kyler Murray's demeanor and body language. Is it a concern? That's coming next on Rise Up Red. Back on the Rise Up Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Kyler Murray and his demeanor on the field. Some call it pouting. Some call it frustration, visible frustration. The comments that he makes in post-game interviews. Is it a concern? We go back to the loss to the Dolphins, and he really had a hard time verbalizing what he wanted to say. And ultimately, after a lot of pausing, he said very little because he was absolutely frustrated with the loss. He audibly scoffed at a question about running the ball. It's a fair question. Yes, he has answered some of the things, and he kind of laughed at he's asking me that again. He did the same thing way back when in the offseason about last year when they talked about baseball. It's like, I've answered this a gazillion times. But, he talks about how he doesn't need to run for the offense to be successful. You see his frustration on the sidelines. You see him, it looks like socially detached from his teammates, looking frustrated at other teammates that make plays. Bart Scott said he's not a leader of men. One of my writers on Cards Wire talked about the question. It looks like he's sulking and pouting. How concerned, on a level of 1 to 10, how concerned are you about his on-field demeanor and the way he speaks to reporters?
0. I mean, I'm not really worried right now. You're talking about a guy that literally never lost in his, life until he got to the Arizona Cardinals. So, if anything, I would prefer that it wasn't okay to lose. It wasn't okay to underperform, and that it does rub people the wrong way and upset people when the team doesn't play up to what they believe their expectation level is. I mean, let's just be honest. This is the second. I think Tampa Bay retook them over the last couple of years, but this is the second most losing franchise in all North American sports, in the history of sports. They've never won a Super Bowl. They've only been to one Super Bowl. They haven't had a winning record until this year since 2015. They're backed up 500 again, so there's a real chance that they don't finish with a winning record for the fifth, or would this be fifth consecutive season in a row. They have, a handful of winning records since they moved to the Valley. I mean, I guess I'm just a little different in that it's nice to see that somebody that wants the accountability to be there and wants people to, have to play at a high level and not be okay with losing. And I mean, you and I can look at it and say, hey, this is just year 2 of the rebuild, and Kyler's looking at it and saying, hey, we should be competing for a Super Bowl. Like, why aren't we there yet? And, maybe that's not reasonable from him to expect to win a Super Bowl in year 2, but at the same time, again, he's never lost. I mean, he lost, 2 games in college as a starter?
And that
3
was,
games?
yes, the 2 games, and those were the only 2 games he lost from date back to when he was in high school, because he went undefeated in high school. Here's the thing with Kyler. I believed, and I don't remember if I've ever said this on the air here on the show, but I've spoken to people, and I felt that Kyler was going to be potentially Cam Newton-like, abrasive or dismissive with losing. I think he took it last year really well, considering it was, a building year for him and things like that. And so I think he was able to take it in stride. This year, though, I think he really believes that this team is good enough to win games, and he really hates losing. And the thing that this is a societal thing, it is a perception thing, and it isn't anything wrong. However, when you have players like a Carson Palmer or a Tom Brady who can set this loss to the side and be frustrated and hate it, and yet still be charismatic in front of reporters and be able to explain things. Here's the thing. With Carson, after years of covering Carson, the one thing that I really appreciated him, because it made my job easier, he was willing to get into the nuts and bolts and kind of talk through what he saw. But Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray don't like to talk schematics or explain what happens on the field. They don't like doing that. That's just something they don't do. And so they talk about, we need to do better. And fans don't like to hear that. Obviously, fans all know we need to do better. The problem is that what they see on the field, and it's just perception, they see a guy who's frustrated, and it looks like that he gets down and can't get out of it. When when he gets frustrated on the field, and that you talked about just recently, mistakes can compound. And where, let's say, Josh Rosen in his rookie year, he maintained, positivity the whole time. Like, it was frustrating, but he was always rah-rah with his teammates. Now, Kyler's not a rah-rah guy, and what gets him out of his dumps is making some plays and getting hyped up again. And that's hard to do. Now, does that mean when he's frustrated on the sideline that he's blaming his teammates? Come on. We've seen Phillip Rivers yap and holler, and Tom Brady, these Hall of Fame level quarterbacks. Now, granted, Kyler's not there yet. Just really rip into teammates publicly on the field. So I don't see a problem with it as long as it's going the right way. If his frustration leads to worse play, then that needs to change. Or if that body language leads his teammates to believe less. That's where the issue is. And yes, there is an element of leadership as a quarterback where he needs to maintain some sort of quiet dignity about the position, that he can be unflappable. The only issue is that the players around him see the frustration and then their play degrades. And that's the only problem I see. I see him in terms of how he speaks to the media. I think he can do better and be a little more professional. But come on. This is the way a lot of young people talk to reporters. They don't like... This is a generation of players who doesn't like repeated questions, who doesn't like stupid questions, unnecessary questions. I have a 19-year-old son that reacts almost exactly the same way to things that when it comes to things of that nature. And media is old media. We have different values in this generation of media, and it's just different. And so I'm not particularly worried, but it could become problematic, especially, and I'll say it this way, for a young black quarterback, he's not going to get he will get more flack for that sort of reaction than, say, a Josh Allen who comes across as, "Aw, shucks," and that type of thing, because he's a really good kid. Kyler's a really good kid. He's a super competitor, and it bothers him. Like Cam Newton, it bothers him when they lose.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing is you've got not to get too into this, but you and I have talked about this a lot behind the scenes, obviously. And let's be honest, this is a town where there's not much difference in the media that is covering Kyler Murray that was covering Dave Brown and, those guys.
Many of the same guys, in fact.
And so this, I'm trying to pick my words very carefully because I don't want it to come across as disrespectful towards the media in this town. But there are a lot of guys that are, quite frankly, they're there because the gig is pretty simple. They've probably had a chance to go on and be in bigger media outlets, cover bigger teams, in bigger cities, and they've chosen to stay in Arizona because, let's be honest, it's a relatively cushy job from a fan and an ownership standpoint. And Cliff and Kyler definitely push that media away. And as you said, they're not Carson Palmer who are willing to sit down and talk schematics with you. They're not Bruce Arians who are going to just give you great quote after great quote as he flails aimlessly with the greatest quarterback that's ever played the game, by the way. He ran away from a hard situation in Arizona to go flail with the greatest quarterback that's ever played. But that's who this legacy media in Arizona loves. If you go on Twitter, they're still gushing about how great and candid Bruce Arians is.
He lied so much.
and so that's the thing.
But he made the lies sound good.
Right.
Well, and the thing was with Cliff. Cliff is very much a Bill Belichick guy. He will not. He's very careful to not put any blame on players individually on anything that he says. It's all about him, and it's all about the team. And so it's not fun to hear, and it makes for very watered down content when it comes to what the coaches say. But that's who he is.
Right, and so that's the thing is, you've got a young Kyler's enigmatic. He's not. Look at Kyler in the sense of just put yourself, I don't want to say in his shoes, but from his perspective of starting at Oklahoma. You follow one of the most outlandish, bombastic players in recent college football history with Baker Mayfield. Kyler Murray doesn't grab his crotch and tell the other sideline to, suck on this. He's never done that. That's Baker Mayfield. And people love that. And Baker's outlandish and outspoken and loves the media and loves, the attention. Kyler just wants to play football. And Kyler just wants to win football games. And so he's not, seeking out the media attention. Kyler's demeanor as a young player actually really reminds me of Marshawn Lynch. Not funny Skittles Marshawn Lynch, but earlier in his career with Buffalo and, when he had some issues and things of that nature where, people said similar things about him. Well, why isn't he, outgoing and what's wrong with him? And, he needs to speak to us and think about that. Buffalo is kind of similar to Arizona in that time frame. They weren't exactly good. They were struggling. They drafted a running back in the top 10 and he kind of flailed in Buffalo. And so, a lot of it's going to be, I think, as he's more comfortable as a player, he'll definitely open up to the media and have a better relationship. But I think a lot of it, too, is, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, is that he's still trying to find himself as an NFL player. And he knows what he expects of himself, and he's not there right now. And so I think it's hard for him to be, happy, joy with all these reporters who are saying, why aren't you playing at an MVP level anymore? I mean, we were just talking about how great you were, and now you stink. And, like, what's going on? Your team stinks, you stink, your coach stinks. You know, like, it's tough, man. And so I definitely understand why it's a conversation. One, you know, it's easy to write about. Let's be honest. When you're just when there's not much great stuff to write about in terms of the on the field product, you write about how bad the team is, and then one of the best kind of, I don't want to say clickbait because it's not clickbait, but one of the easiest articles to write is the demeanor of the star quarterback, part of the problem.
Right, and for me, there's also a level to this. Kyler is facing adversity. Now, he faced adversity as a rookie, and that's different because he was still learning the league. I'm sure now he works his tail off, so I'm not going to debate that. He's worked his tail off his entire life to be here. But this is the first time where winning is hard and performing at a high level is hard, and that teams can take him away from things he's able to do. So he's finding things that are challenging. That's another level of frustration that he's having to deal with. And that's something that comes with experiences where you can react better to it without being, being a pouty crybaby or being a bad loser or sore loser like the knock that Cam Newton got, for first couple 3 years. I don't have a problem with it. I hope that as he grows in his career, that he can open up a little bit more because, it makes my job easier, if anything else. And especially if I always want to come. So you guys who listen know my perspective on this. So I am infinitely positive. I'm not out to. This is the team I grew up rooting for. So I like the team. I openly root for this team, and so any question I have is not a gotcha question. For me, it's always, I'm coming from the positivity, because I want to do things positive. But explain. I like to get into things, well, what happened? I don't mind that. And I'm not out to try to get you about, why are you guys so terrible? It's like, well, what's going wrong? I'm not out to paint you in a bad picture, because I want you guys to win.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think, right or wrong, that I think you'll see a better demeanor and a happier, because that was the thing, is winning, is kind of a cure-all, and especially, like we've said, is when you've never lost. And so this wasn't a question. Even if he struggled, there was no question about, his demeanor and how he was acting and things like that. And remember, there was games he was throwing 3 interceptions earlier in the season and missing receivers and, things like that. And so it's definitely one of those situations where I think that it's a fair question to ask, but I don't think that when you get I don't think you're ever, and not you as in, Jess Root, but you as in, part of the media, I don't think you're ever going to get the answer that you're really looking for, because the answer is not anything tangible. He's trying to navigate, as you said, the first time in your life, not, as you said, he works harder than a lot of people. But for the first time in your life, one of the things that you're best at is hard, and that's a hard thing to overcome. And the NFL is the most popular sport in America, and you're coming off a rookie of the year season. You were being talked about as an MVP candidate early in the season. This is all, kind of the perfect storm to say, what's wrong with Kyler? Well, your reaction isn't becoming of what a star quarterback should behave like and act like. And, like you said, why are you acting moody and upset? You should be happy that I'm still talking to you, because all of a sudden you're not a very good quarterback type of vibe, as opposed to, hey, like, do you feel like you guys can get back on track and you can get back to where you were, 3 or 4 weeks ago, where you're putting up, 400 plus yards of total offense a game, and you guys are winning Offensive Player of the Week trophies, week in and week out.
Coming on next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's look ahead to their Week 14 matchup against the New York Giants, the New York Football Giants, who just beat the Seattle Seahawks. That's coming on next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. The Cardinals will now travel back east to play at MetLife Stadium for the second time this season. The first time they picked up an easy win against the New York Jets. Now they get to play the New York Giants, the 5-7 New York Giants, who lead the NFC East and are coming off a 17-12 win over the Seattle Seahawks. What can we expect from this team? And I will go with this in the fact that it looks like they hope Daniel Jones can start, but it might be Colt McCoy. And Colt McCoy led the Giants to a win over the Seahawks. What happened?
That's a fair question. I'm not sure I know. You look at what this team is and what they are right now is a team that has, in similar fashion to the Miami Dolphins, and not shocking, right? Turned things over on their roster, put players like and this isn't a shot at him, but like a Marcus Golden, just like Kenyon Drake, maybe wasn't in the long-term plan. So hey, let's get this veteran out of here. Let's start playing the young guys that we're going to build around more moving forward. And we're seeing kind of the similar results, just a year sooner than what Miami saw. Obviously, it helps that you're not playing in a division with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick still playing together. But the Giants kind of picked the right year to get back on top, in the sense of they're at 5-7 and first in their division, where if they were in the NFC West, 5-7 would be last in your division. If you're in the NFC South, you're second to last in your. So that's the thing, is it's just kind of a perfect storm. That being said, they've invested heavily along the offensive and defensive line. Andrew Thomas was the 4th overall pick this year. They, gave up a ton for Leonard Williams, somebody you and I talked about quite a bit last year. Would he have been a good trade target for the team? They brought in a veteran play caller to kind of mold Daniel Jones, and Jones has been bad this year, I think is not good, maybe is the best way to put it. I don't know how you want to say it, but he's completing not very high, 63%, so not too bad for 2,300 yards. He only has 8 touchdowns. He has 9 interceptions. You just kind of look at it, and he hasn't done a ton, but they are a team that wins with defense and special teams and ball control. And not shockingly, when similar to how the Patriots beat the Cardinals a couple weeks ago. And I think that's kind of their MO right now, because they're not a good offense, but you look at their 4-game winning streak, they beat the Washington football team 23-20. They beat the Philadelphia Eagles 27-17. I don't really know what to make of that. I guess we'll know more after next week's game when the Cardinals play that team. They just squeaked by the Cincinnati Bengals without Joe Burrow 19-17. And I don't know if you saw the Bengals this week, but that's not a good football team without Joe Burrow. And then they beat the Seattle Seahawks 17-12. And there's kind of a common thread in all of that. 20 points to the Washington football team, 17 to the Eagles, 17 to the Bengals, and then 12 to the Seahawks. Their defense is not bad.
They sacked Russell Wilson 5 times, 2.5 by Leonard Williams, and they forced Russell Wilson to throw an interception and he lost a fumble as well, something he hasn't done both of in a while.
Yeah.
And so they're really solid. And they were great on third down. Stopped the Seahawks on both their fourth down attempts, and so they just limited the damage. And they weren't able to be that offense. We've seen that Seattle offense. It can be high flying, and they just took the sails out of it with pressure, and then they ran the ball for 190 yards. They only had 100 passing yards, but they didn't need it because they didn't even really control the clock. But they did enough.
Well, and you kind of look at the key number, and the Giants are 5-2 when they hold teams under 20 points or less. So they beat Washington twice, giving up 20 and 19. They lost to the Chicago Bears 17-13. Lost to the Los Angeles Rams 17-9. And then, we talked about the other wins. The funny thing is, so in those wins, they have 350 yards, 382 yards, and 386 yards. Those are in the wins. They have in their other 2 wins, they have 240 yards and 290 yards. And you just mentioned the 290 yards. 190 of that was on the ground. The 240-yard game, they had 108 yards passing. 108 yards passing, and they won an NFL football game. So in 2 of their wins, they have 208 yards passing total. So in the end, it just is going to come down to, can the Cardinals get off the snide offensively? You and I, we didn't talk about it a ton this week because there's so much focus on the offense. But the defense has not been good. So I don't want that to be taken the wrong way. But it has done enough the last 2 weeks to win football games. Now,
at least initially, yes.
But there's also been key possessions where the offense has, gotten it close. I mean, that Rams game is a perfect example. They get it close, and then the Rams just go down and score. And that's kind of the MO, right? Like, get back to close, and it's like, oh, we've waited so long, we need to give up something at this point. But I think the biggest worry always is, and I think you would agree with me on this, I don't want to speak out of turn, but this is an early morning East Coast December game. Does this running game have enough juice left to get out early, get out in a hurry, run for 200 run for 150 yards and really give this team a chance to win? Because since the Bills game where they ran for 217 yards, they ran for 57 against the Seahawks, 138, which isn't bad, but that would put them a lot lower in the league in rushing, and then 92 last week against the Rams. So that's the thing is, and football is simple when you really just boil it down. Can you score over 20 points and hold your opponent to less than 20 points? That may seem like a simple question, but it's a complex answer based on what we've seen from both of these teams the last couple of weeks. the Giants defense is more than capable of holding the Cardinals offense to less than 20 points on the day. The Cardinals have to find a way to stay efficient. They have to find a way to stay on the field, and they have to find a way to grind out yards as opposed to, getting in 3rd and 8s and then hoping that Kyler can make something happen, which he did early in the season, and he's not anymore.
Well, and here's the thing: the Giants don't have the offensive firepower, especially if Colt McCoy's starting.
But I mean, Daniel Jones hasn't been.
It's true. Either. It's true. But we've seen him be productive, at least in the past. And so if the Cardinals can turn this into, like, if offensively they can turn this into a little bit of a track meet, guess what? They're gonna you're gonna feel good about it, and they're gonna pull away, and it won't be pretty for the Giants. The problem is that if they get a couple of stops and then the Cardinals start pressing, it really is. The Cardinals need to get that running game going early. Whether they need to open it up through the short passing game and then open the running game. But this is, luckily, Chase Edmonds has had 2 great games in his career at MetLife. So maybe this is another Chase Edmonds game. And
yeah, so Jess is telling you to start Chase Edmonds in all of your fantasy football playoffs this weekend.
That wouldn't be a bad idea. But it is this is a game where I think the running game becomes important. Although it will be interesting to see how the passing game opens back up with the return of Larry Fitzgerald, what type of shape he'll be in after the COVID situation. I want to say that, yes, the Cardinals are going to get better this week, but I don't think it's going to be the prettiest of games. As much as I'd like to think they can get the track meet going and bust over, 450 yards and 35 points, but if they can, if they get to the mid-20s, I think that's right where they need to be to tune themselves up for the last few games of the season. What we can't have happen is to have them get one-dimensional and then Kyler start to get hit some.
Yeah, and so, I mean, at the end of the day, I think when you look at this game, that's really what it boils down to. Can the Cardinals get 20 points or over 20 points? I think this is a game where they get 3 touchdowns. I think they win this game in a very close one, 24-20. I think that the Giants are the perfect kind of poster child for what the NFC East is right now, which is an ugly football division that is not afraid to beat you, 7-6, and that's how they want to try and beat you right now, based on what they have available and things of that nature. But I think in the end, I think the Cardinals do get back in the win column this week. But I don't think it's going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. And it could be a long Sunday with a loss in the morning if that's how it comes out.
I think they pull away. I don't think it'll be a blowout, but I think 24-7. It'll be a close game that becomes 24-17 by the end of it, where they're up, 21-17 late, and they get a field goal to push that to a full touchdown win. And I think they get back on the winning side of things, because honestly, I hate to think what would happen if they don't. Because then, I think people are already starting to talk about moving on from Cliff Kingsbury. It's crazy talk right now, but just for the sake of the buzz that the Cardinals got early in the season, I just don't want that to completely bottom out. They get the win. They're 7-6. They have a chance to go up to 8-6 and assure themselves an even season at least. And I think they come away with a win this weekend. They kind of get well. I don't think they have a big passing game, but I think that the running game will emerge again and be impactful. Whether it's Kyler's legs or Edmonds or Drake, I think they're going to be able to. I think things will get a little bit right.
I agree, and I think it's just going to be an ugly win, but a win nonetheless.
And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, episode 290. We hope that we are back next week talking about a 7-6 Cardinals team and not one that's lost 5 of 6 and 4 in a row. That's not fun. We've had shows like that. It's not fun to talk about. But we'll be back again next week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. Hopefully Cardinals pick up a win. That's enough for this week, guys.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, Be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.
Rise up! Rise up! Rise